everybody, and welcome to Poddimouths, the podcast about everything and nothing. I'm John Quaddy, here with my cohort, Mr. Nick Kubik. Nick?
Oh, you said cohort.
I didn't mean to. I meant cohort. But
I like cohort.
We need to play this on, maybe we could play this on Valentine's Day. My cohort.
Oh, there you go.
See what I mean?
So this is our Hey, everybody! This is our Valentine's Day episode.
Welcome to the Valentine's Day episode.
Oh my goodness!
Hey, we've got some good stuff today. We actually have a topic, don't we, Nick? I'm kind of surprised about this.
Well, John, we always have a topic. It's just whether or not we decide to talk about it.
We just don't get there, do we?
We never get there,
okay.
Which is, all the podcasts, I think I've told you this before, all the podcasts that I listen to, a lot of them, a vast majority of them never hit the topic that they expect to hit. And some of them have even stopped putting the actual the actual topic in their title, and they'll pick something funny like, my cohort. That's going to be the title of this episode. It's the cohort episode.
I think that's exactly how we have to do it. And if you think for a second I didn't do that on purpose, well, you would be correct.
Well, it's the comedic genius in you.
Did you say comedic penis or genius?
Either. I think either is pretty accurate.
Okay, very good. I'm fine with that.
Well, John, what were we going to talk about today?
Well, today we were going to talk about something near and dear to the hearts of everybody. Okay, not really, mostly car people. And we are kind of car people. And that was electric vehicles.
Electric vehicles. Where do I start with electric vehicles? Now, I want our listener to keep in mind that I am a huge Jeep Wrangler fan. So talking about electric vehicles might be on the borderline of sacrilege for me.
Yes. What if Jeep Wrangler, though, came up with an electric vehicle? Would you be a player?
Absolutely.
Oh, see, you were that easy to convert.
Pretty easy. Hadn't you learned that by now?
I thought we weren't going to talk about that. It's interesting. And
there's nothing we won't talk about.
When you say you're a huge Jeep Wrangler person, are you just big on the Jeep Wranglers, or are you only big on the huge ones?
Oh, I think we've talked about that before. I am not a lifted truck fan. Now I like the lights and the big wheels, the mud tires, and the big tube bumpers and things like that. But no, big, not really big. Okay. I'm not big on the big. Right. But I just really like Jeeps. I've had two, and I've loved both of them. It's kind of the opposite of a boat owner's life. The two best days in a boat owner's life is the day he buys a boat and the day he sells it.
Days.
The two worst days of my life were the days that I sold my Jeep. Both of them. Yeah.
That's kind of a sad admission.
It is.
Well, do you currently have one?
I do not have one, but I am in the market. I'm looking for one.
Is it true? Would it be correct to say once you're a Jeep owner, you're always in the market?
Always in the market. That is very, very true.
Good.
Yep.
That's an important concept because as a Harley guy, I'm also always in the market, no matter what. You're always looking. Yeah. You're always, okay. So if you talk about it, and you said where to begin with electric, and I want to start here because I think, Nick, this is something that continues to enthrall me. My dad, and you and I haven't even talked about this, used to work with Wisconsin Power and Light. And it was the electric company, if you will, for the state of Wisconsin for the better part of 100 years, probably. And he was a lineman at one.
We've had power for that long?
Believe it or not, we had. I mean, it wasn't a lot of power. I think when they started out, Wisconsin Power and Light consisted of 3 batteries. But he was a lineman, so he had the things that strapped to your boots, that allowed you to climb poles and all that stuff. I have more stories about that. But one day I remember, and I'm going to guess it was like 1967 or 68, he brought home from work an electric vehicle, what was back then referred to as an electric vehicle. And I remember it was yellow And when you opened the trunk, it had a trunk full of lead acid batteries. So it probably wasn't very safe. Exactly. It probably wasn't very safe.
Probably not.
But it was the first of what we would call probably today an electric vehicle. Battery technology has changed dramatically. But if you think about it, if we had put all the effort and time and money behind battery development starting back then, can you imagine where we would be in terms of batteries today?
So if we go back in history, some of the very first automobiles were actually electric automobiles. The first motors were electric. And we're talking before the Model T, before Henry Ford. Well, maybe not before Henry Ford, but before he just figured out how to mass produce vehicles. A couple of different things happened. One, what were we were already pulling out of the ground. We were pulling oil out of the ground. So there are a lot of business people that really wanted to push us towards the internal combustion engine because they stood to make a lot more money than they could with electric vehicles. Now, the electric vehicles were more expensive, as they are now, because the technology was new, but I'm right there with you. If we would have kept going with the electric vehicles way back then, one, we may not be having some of the conversations we're having now about global change and global warming and things like that, but we also would be a lot further along with the production of batteries. And so I agree with you 100%. I just find it fascinating that it was pretty much a business decision back then because of, well, I mean, pretty much everything in life now is a business decision. You know, there are a lot of people that choose their next car based on a business decision. And for me, I'm on the road a lot, and I would absolutely, I'm going to sound like a real ass, but you know, going back to the initial conversation about me loving Jeeps, I do love Jeeps, but one of the reasons, well, both reasons I sold my Jeeps purely because of gas mileage. My first one, I got really good gas mileage in my first one. It was 15 miles to the gallon. But my second one got no more than 12 miles to the gallon. And I drive a lot. You know that. Yep. I'm on the road every single week, and I drive thousands upon thousands of miles. I can't do a Jeep for that, and I can't do an electric vehicle, even though I honestly would love to have an electric vehicle. I would love either a Nissan Leaf, because I think they're fantastic, or I would love a Tesla. I'd probably kill myself in a Tesla because they're so freaking fast, but you know, that's what where we have it.
Hey, so let me clarify just a little bit, because you know, you're right. I mean, there is a political element to it, but I think any technology that we would have put our minds to for a long period of time is going to generate, just like the internal combustion engine has generated mass changes in how we viewed that as a technology. For instance, one of the very first methods of propulsion for vehicles was actually steam. And so had we put all of our eggs in the steam basket, I'm confident that even though it would still be steam, we would have much better technology surrounding steam propulsion today than we do. And so I think just by the very nature of spending the time, money, and effort on one versus another, you're going to generate better technology around it. So I think that's really all I'm saying about electric engines. I think,
is that all you're saying?
It is and it isn't. I'm glad you wanted me to clarify that. Well, it is because I think that it is just at the end game it's just another method of propulsion. That's all it is. People think that electric is so clean and it's so wonderful. Well, it is on its own, but you don't generate it out of thin air. Electric power comes from someplace else. The way you recharge the battery comes from something else. It doesn't come from more electric power. You don't recharge a battery by using another battery. You plug it into the wall, and that power is most likely generated by coal.
Well, it could be coal. It could be steam from a nuclear plant.
Most likely coal. Statistically speaking, it's coal. And so people that say electric is so clean and pure and simple, and It's not, because you're using coal to generate electricity to make that electric vehicle go. Now, you can still make an argument for it.
And take it. Oh, absolutely. Yep. And take it a step further. What kind of effort does it take to build the batteries for these electric vehicles? I read a report, and I wish I could find it. I tried to find it again, but I read a report that there's actually more pollution that goes into the air making the batteries that go into electric vehicles than what a single internal combustion engine on the road would have put in its not quite its lifetime, but I think 3 or 4 years of use. Yeah, I wish maybe our listener can find that article. I cannot find that article anywhere, but I do remember reading that. And I could have been dreaming. I do tend to sleep a lot, so.
Especially when you're awake and you have a unique ability to do that.
Yes.
Well,
I don't even have to close my eyes half the time.
Which is invaluable in meetings. This is,
hey, you've been in plenty of meetings.
I do know that I admire that about you. This to me is one of the cool things about electric, though. It is another method of propulsion. And it's one that I think we could benefit from in the long run, but with the recognition that it's not the be all end all that a lot of people make it out to be. It is one way of hopefully doing something that is going to be a better long-term solution based on batteries for vehicles to run them, as opposed to using internal combustion or gasoline or whatever. Not that that's bad, because frankly, they are so efficient these days in internal combustion engines that it's almost impossible to create something that's going to compete with it in terms of efficiency.
Right. And an electric motor, there's a difference between a battery operated electric vehicle and something that uses an electric motor. You can run an electric motor off of, gas, internal combustion. You can run an electric motor off of hydrogen. There are a number of different ways you can run it. You don't necessarily have to have a battery.
It seems like everybody either jumps on board or off board of the electric vehicle train. And one of the things I guess that I wanted to make sure we touched on as we're having this conversation is the fact that the U.S. government subsidizes electric vehicle production. And I want to know your thought on that. Is that something that's valuable, A, to the economy, B, to society in general, C, to the car makers, D, to the end users? Is that something that we should be doing? Should we be subsidizing, essentially picking winners and losers in the capitalism marketplace by saying, we're going to give you $7,500 tax credits for the first 100,000 people that buy your product?
There are a couple of different ways I think we should look at that, because is the government just giving these car makers money? I mean, it looks like that, and that's what they want the public to think. But in reality, the government is a business, and I think that these are investments that the government is making, and I think that overall the government will probably make money back on it. That's my personal opinion, which is not necessarily a bad thing. I think that is actually a smart way to use the taxpayer's dollar. If we can make more money by investing in things, then by all means, go for it. I also think that I think your statement about winners and losers is fantastic, because if you look at the market as a whole, what actual automakers have viable electric vehicles available for purchase? Nissan,
Tesla, General Motors, Nissan.
General Motors. Now, there's some argument there. Is that truly an electric vehicle? That's not a 100% electric vehicle.
Well, it's not, but it doesn't matter, because the government has chosen it as one of the vehicles that are viable for the $7,500 tax credit. And they're not making it any longer. They're going to stop making it.
But now they are putting research into electric vehicles. But let's look at historically companies that have said that, who have been subsidized by the government, that they were going to put into production or design or develop certain things. We look at the airplanes that were supposed to be built and given to the war effort. The Spruce Goose is a perfect example of that. Howard Hughes and the Spruce Goose, that was subsidized heavily from the government. But that was an investment that never flew. Well, it did fly. Forgive me, history buffs. But it flew for a few minutes, but it never went into service.
Not far, and not much of an altitude from what I recall.
It was, I think, 60 feet or 100 feet, something like that. But
right.
yeah,
right.
So there are plenty of businesses that build, and that was what Howard Hughes was accused of too, that he was profiting from that government subsidy, even though he put a large percentage of his money into the Spruce Goose itself, and a lot of other airplanes that he was developing for the military. The one he crashed in, famous in the movie. I mean, it was a great scene in the Howard Hughes movie. The Aviator was an airplane being built for the military. And so, he almost paid the ultimate price for that aircraft that ultimately didn't go into production. But I think it's the same thing with a lot of these electric vehicles. I think that there are some of these companies that are saying, yes, we're going into development because we're getting money from the government, but we might not ever see those vehicles appear. So when we go back to the winners and losers thing, we look at someone like a Tesla who's taken a lot of this money and they've built what I would consider an incredible vehicle. I know someone that has one, and I've had the opportunity to ride in it. He also has a Mercedes, not an electric Mercedes, but a Mercedes, very nice sedan, very expensive sedan, probably cost about the same as the Tesla cost him. And he said, with the exception of the electric battery and this really cool console in the middle that's all touchscreen, the rest of this car is a Mercedes. So I think there's the ability, or not the ability, the companies have the opportunity to really take technology that exists now and take the money from the government and really start pushing it. And quite honestly, I think the only company in my mind that has done that successfully is Tesla. And that the only reason I say that too is because you can take a Tesla, depending on how much you spend, and you could drive it all over the country if you really wanted to. Because of the technology that's built into it. Yeah, the battery might only last you 300, 400 miles, but on the GPS itself, it tells you can say, my last destination is New York City, and drive from Nashville to New York City, and it'll tell you where to stop and how long you need to stop there to recharge the battery all the way up to New York City. So you can make it.
And that is cool. And that speaks to the infrastructure piece of it that I think Tesla, and perhaps even more narrowly Elon Musk, has helped to put into place. And there is no question, here's a guy with vision who has spent a dramatic amount of his wealth and some would argue a dramatic amount of the company's wealth, in developing not only battery technology, but infrastructure for charging the batteries and so on, because he really was talking about using the vehicles, not just having them sit in your garage and have the potential to go 300 miles or whatever the number is today. So no, you're right. I think that's an important element. It's usability. It's not just the fact that it can do it. It's are they doing it? And they do it very effectively.
The unfortunate part of it is they're so expensive. Even the low end models, the ones that he's said were built for the common man and they're there to compete with the Leaf, price wise, they're still out of so many people's grasp because they're so expensive. And then my other concern with the electric vehicles, specifically now, is the resale. I remember the saying growing up: you don't buy a BMW. You lease a BMW. No one buys a BMW. No one buys a Mercedes. Everyone wanted to lease them because the cost of ownership for those vehicles at a certain point becomes just way too expensive, and you'd much rather just get into a new one, and the resale value probably wasn't that great either. I think the same can be said for a Tesla or even a Leaf. You don't want to buy any of these vehicles. You want to lease them. But what happens with the used ones? How many people are really going to get into a used Leaf or a used Tesla after the battery has probably lost some of its ability to hold a charge and so on and so forth? How are they going to recon a lot of these vehicles?
That's a great question. And then in reality, these batteries do have an end life, and if it involves the trade-in, for example, involves replacing the battery, as long as that's built into the upfront cost, much like it would be on a lease, then okay, I can see an argument for it. But most Teslas, most electric vehicles in general, Chevy Volts, if you can call that as an electric versus a hybrid, it's built in. Because they know, and it's built in as a lease rather, because they know that no one is going to be able to afford to upgrade a $10,000 battery and make that car viable still in the marketplace.
Right.
So in my mind, and I guess that's really the question I have when it comes down to, what is it worth? How about that $7,500? Shouldn't any vehicle that's produced, shouldn't any vehicle have to survive in the marketplace on its own? Should we be essentially, as I said, choosing winners or losers by giving more money to a vehicle that is electric in this case versus one that's not? And again, remembering that it may be an electrified vehicle, and that's great, but to charge that battery that exists in those vehicles, you still have to use fossil fuels,
right,
in almost every situation. So shouldn't that vehicle be forced, like the others, to survive in the marketplace on its own without getting that special subsidy?
Well, I think I got sidetracked in my response to that. And I think there's two things that we have to consider as well. As I said, the business of the government is all about investing. And we already know, it's not something we talk about a lot, but a lot of these coal companies, a lot of these fossil fuel companies are also taking government subsidies to exist. So we could take that and look at it and weigh that against the question itself. But here's my Sure. take on it from the electric vehicle side of things. It is still it's not a new technology, but it is a new evolving technology that I do think we need to explore. And I think in the beginning, and this goes not just for electric vehicles, but I think also the other fuel cell type vehicles that we've discussed or are on the horizon. I think for a short time in the beginning to develop these, I do think that a little bit of help is probably needed. Do I think that they need to do it for a long period of time? I don't think so. I think once it becomes viable, and going back to my statement about reconditioning electric vehicles and actually having a market out there, because right now I don't think there's a true market. I think rich people have the ability to buy them. And I think the used ones, we've yet to see how that market is going to develop. Once that's known and once it can sustain itself based on the used car market and having multiple lives beyond its initial purchase, I think then that might be the time when a lot of these manufacturers can start letting these cars stand on their own. But that's my personal opinion.
No, I think it's a fair one. And I guess what it draws me to is something that I've said for years, and I don't know if it's true, but it's my perception that if gas suddenly drops below $1 a gallon again, let's say gasoline goes to 75 cents a gallon, I think along with it will go the dramatic demand for whatever demand there is for electric vehicles. I think that's how close we are as a marketplace to really eradicating any other form of propulsion beyond the gasoline powered engine. I think that's suddenly, if gas is 75 cents a gallon, it's pretty difficult to justify front end or back end with or without a $7,500 subsidy, how you're going to say, well, I want an electric vehicle no matter what, because pretty soon at 75 cents a gallon, it's pretty cheap to drive.
I 100% agree. I 100% agree.
Yeah.
I think, though, we also have to consider the rest of the world, not just our country, because I do think in most, not all, but in quite a few countries outside of the United States, gas is not anywhere near the price that we pay here. I think we're still very, very lucky. And if you look at it, I think you are spot on, because look at Ford, look at Chevy, look at Chrysler, Jeep, Ram. What are they doing right now? Most of these manufacturers have or are in the process of getting rid of their sedans and putting most of their focus on trucks and SUVs. And that's mainly because gas is so cheap, and the combustion engines are becoming more efficient even on the larger vehicles. But we as Americans still want large vehicles. And that, I think it's like most things, we're going to have to train ourselves out of it. We're going to have to be scared into it. And I just don't think, the people that are marketing on the side of the alternative fuel vehicles are doing as good a job as those that have been doing it with Ford and Chevy and all these other manufacturers for the last 100 years.
Well, and I think you're right there, Nick. And I think that the greatest teacher is history, where 2008, 2009, if you recall, General Motors and Chrysler were out of the leasing business suddenly because they got burned on $4.50 a gallon gasoline on their vehicles that they leased. And these closed-end leases, well, you have a determined lease end valuation, so a residual value. And the problem with that is they lost their butts. And so, well, that's it. We're not going to lease anymore, which is a ridiculous statement for any OEM thinking that they're going to sell a $50,000 and $60,000 vehicle by putting someone in a 96-month loan. It's just ridiculous. And so, I mean, the economics behind that are just ludicrous. And for them to even make that statement shows that how desperate they were. So even with that in their memory banks, they're still, as you said, coming out with bigger vehicles, getting rid of sedans because the demand just isn't there. And if the demand isn't there, the production shouldn't be there either.
Right. Speaking of, I just saw a commercial the other day for a Jeep Wrangler. Of course, it was on.
You shut off all the other commercials except Wranglers.
Well, this was YouTube. It was running
okay, all right.
Because I was just watching a whole bunch of Jeep things. No, I saw my very first advertisement, and it was like $328 on a brand new Jeep Unlimited Sahara. Jeep Unlimited Sahara version with a couple of add-ons, leased for 48 months. I have never seen. I mean, I know that they exist because obviously selling cars, you see that option, but I had never seen one advertised for a 48-month lease. Usually,
financially speaking or monetarily speaking, the benefits of leasing you reach their peak at 42 months. I mean, to get to the low payment. And you're right. I haven't seen one. If I have, it's been an awful long time that a 48-month lease is even a consideration.
Well, consideration is one thing, but advertised, that blew my mind.
Well, it's advertised if it's going to get the low payment. I understand that part of it, but the point is, for it to be advertised, it has to generate the lowest possible payment. So, what obviously, then we would guess that it's better than the 60-month payment because the residual value would be dramatically higher at 48 months than it would at 60. And it's still, though, it's lower than the 36-month payment, which means there's some sweet spot on the residual value that is allowing that payment to be as low as possible.
Right. I just thought it was crazy.
It is. It's something we haven't seen.
And it's one thing that we always have to educate car buyers on, and it's something that a lot of the salespeople that I train, we talk about is, what is the difference between a lease and retail? But going much further, I don't want to dive into that, but going much further, when you're talking to a customer, their response to leasing a lot of times is, I don't want to lease because I want to own my car. Well, okay, a lease is 36 months. You're probably going to trade your car in after 36 months. That's just statistically, that is, where people usually turn in their cars.
Or at very least, you're going to want to.
Right. And unless you're paying cash for that car on the retail side, you're not going to own your car for 72 months, maybe 60 months if you want a higher payment, but most people want that lower payment. So they're going to go out 72 months. You're not going to own that car. You're never going to own that car. The bank will always own that car unless you're someone who keeps your car for 10, 12 years. And that's why that's one of the other reasons I find that advertisement so insane, is because now the leases are going longer.
You know, it would be interesting we should have in another podcast, we should have that a little more in-depth conversation of leases versus purchases. Absolutely. Because I think there's some real value in that to a lot of people, because there's confusion certainly in the auto industry, but in others as well, surrounding leasing and surrounding, is it always best to pay cash? Is it always best to, and it really depends on the individual buyer, but it also depends on how you're going to use the vehicle, how long you're going to drive the vehicle, how many miles you're going to put on. Anyway, but let's table that. I think that would be a really good discussion for later.
I agree. And there's also, we can also talk about Dave Ramsey and his idea of fleasing. That's what he calls leasing, is fleasing. Yeah. Okay.
Good idea.
So getting back to electric vehicles, I do have a question for you.
Sure.
Because you are a Harley man. What about electric motorcycles?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, because Harley has recently tied their wagons to an electric motorcycle, and they essentially, like most big corporations do, they bought a company that was developing one, and so suddenly now it's theirs. As a Harley guy, and I'll look at it a couple different ways, I have no problem with them whatsoever working into that realm, because I think they need to as a company. They would not be working on behalf of their investors if they weren't at least looking at the future of motorcycle transportation. And frankly, it's not. I understand this. It's not. We are not the future. I am not the future of Harley-Davidson motorcycles, probably because the things we do, the way we ride them and look at the vehicles, I don't pretend to be, a 20-year-old kid who is looking for a sport bike. I've lived that life, and I used to have those type of bikes, and that's what I wanted. But at my advanced age now, I want a cruiser. I want a bike that looks cool and sounds cool and is fun to ride and will go comfortably long distances. So that said, I'm not their core future buyer, but they cannot and should not, at their own peril, afford to ignore me. Because for many, many years, buying the $30,000 and $40,000 motorcycles right now, we are the guys and ladies who used to buy the pieces of crap that they put out. So they need to, it's walking kind of a fine line where they have to pay attention to multiple potential buyers. So you have products that speak to those people. I don't think anyone doesn't like the other. I don't think anybody says, oh, you're an idiot because you just like sport bikes, or you're an idiot because you just like cruisers. If you're saying that there is only one type of bike, well, then you're just being ridiculous, because that's not accurate. So for Harley-Davidson, they just can't afford to ignore anybody. And I think they run the risk of doing that. And they have run the risk of doing that by saying, we embrace younger riders, and look at us. Well, you can do that, but you can't say at the expense of our existing customer base, because as soon as you start doing that, you're writing yourself a ticket for failure. My opinion.
I think that can be said for not just the motorcycle industry, not just Harley-Davidson, but all of the automotive companies that we just talked about. We'll use Tesla as the example. They are branching out. They have an SUV, they have the large expensive sedan, and then they have the quote unquote entry level sedan to try to cover all of those areas. They still have a long way to go, because again, like I said, it's, the vehicles that are available now are just so expensive.
Yeah.
But I agree with you. There are other companies, and I'm going to use Nissan as the example because they're the only one in my mind that have a still in production viable electric vehicle, and that's the Leaf.
Yep.
That's one vehicle. That's the same size, maybe a little bit wider, a little bit bigger than the Versa Note. Mm-hmm. But they have one vehicle. It's one demographic that they're going after there. And I don't know of any plans, to expand that. I would love to see an electric Rogue, and I think people would eat that up. The same on the Ford. I think people would eat up an electric Explorer. Not to the level I think that someone would eat up all of those vehicles if the gas prices dropped to what you said before, 75 cents. I wish it would. I think that the least I've ever paid for gas is 99 cents, and I miss those days. And that was filling up my 1981 Oldsmobile Tornado, my boat.
That was a great car,
not electric vehicle.
Great car, though. Front wheel drive.
Yep. I had that at the same time I had my first Jeep, and I put my Jeep in the ditch with 4-wheel drive more often than I put that Tornado in the ditch. Growing up in Minnesota in the winter, and I tried to put the Tornado in the ditch. It would not go. The thing was a beast. Imagine that with an electric motor.
Ooh, it would have to be a pretty powerful electric motor.
Yeah, it was a big car.
Oh, they had some serious weight behind them.
Yep. Yeah. Not quite as heavy or as big as the Cordobas, but
wow.
They're still pretty big.
The Cordoba. What a beautiful
my
vehicle.
stepdad had 2 of those. Yeah.
Wow.
He had a powder blue one and a poop brown one.
Powder blue and poop brown.
Yep.
That sounds actually a band name.
Yeah. The powder blue one was supposed to be mine, but the engine seized, and right when I got my driver's license. So that's why I got the Tornado.
Man, you caught a lucky break.
I did. I know.
All right, brother. Well, I think we have talked this one out, but this, you know what? I like the idea that there's a concept of what works and what doesn't. And I think as consumers, we're open-minded to new things. Electric vehicles, as I said.
You might be open-minded.
Yes,
I'm not.
I know you're not. As long as it's in a Wrangler, then you're fine.
Pretty close-minded. Absolutely.
But electric vehicles, I think, can be part of the future. But we really have to pay attention to what's available and what it does to the marketplace in general. At all costs, doesn't make sense for any type of vehicle propulsion system. But I think given some technology behind it and given an opportunity for future value, especially when you're talking about pre-owned vehicles and battery technologies, all of that stuff plays a big role in what's going to happen in the future. So let's keep our ears to the ground, because for me, this makes a lot of sense to revisit.
Absolutely. And I think my solution for the future is just to hire Doc Brown from Back to the Future and have a Jeep that runs on fission.
1.21 gigawatts.
88 miles an hour, baby.
Thank you very much.
John and I would like to thank you all for listening, and follow us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and become a patron on Patreon. Help us keep this dream alive. I hope you all have a great day. Bye-bye.